So moving on to tip number 4, let's talk about how to get amazing sunset photos every time. You know, sunset photos are one of those shots that everybody wants to get when they're on a trip or on vacation. Nothing quite says, I am relaxing than a beautiful, orange, red, yellow sunset dropping over this, perfectly blue Caribbean Sea. The problem is most of these shots don't turn out nearly as well as the actual sunset looked. And especially this is one of those cases where everyone will say, this looked much better when I was in there in person taking the shot. So why does that always happen? Why do our sunset shots never quite live up to the reality as we had it in our mind when we were actually there taking the shot? So the biggest challenge with sunset photos is the camera, as you're shooting your camera, the camera actually can't see light and doesn't see light in the same way that our eyes see light. Our eyes, your actual eyes, can see a much wider range of light intensity than the camera can. The camera has a much narrower range of light that it can capture in terms of the range of really bright tones to really dark tones. So the challenge that happens with a sunset is the foreground, being like the ocean or maybe the valley if you're shooting mountains. The foreground is much darker than the background, which is the sky. The sky is still bright. Even when the sun is going down, the sky is still much brighter than the foreground. So the problem is the camera will either overexpose the sky, so then you'll have no color in the sunset, or you'll underexpose the foreground so that the foreground is completely black and then the sky is properly exposed. So neither of these situations quite captures the spirit of the place, and that's why most sunset photos fail. So there's two options here. One, you can do a software which is called HDR photography, high dynamic range photography. I actually don't really like this look that much. I find it looks kind of almost like apocalyptic. It looks just kind of a little bit nasty. I've seen some that's good, but generally I have not been as wild about HDR photography. But I did learn a technique years and years and years ago from a photographer named Galen Rowell, who invented what was called a neutral density, a graduated neutral density filter, which sounds very complicated, and all it is this. It's basically a piece of clear plexiglass with a slightly darker top, and then the bottom is clear. And then there's a very narrow kind of range where it's kind of faded in, so that essentially what I do is I line this up right on the horizon. And so this dark part allows the camera to shoot a normal exposure, and then the sky is properly exposed, and then the foreground is also properly exposed. So then you get the full range of light that was visible that your eye could see while you were actually there taking the shot. So let's use the sunset photo from the Philippines as an example. This was taken right as the sun was kind of dipping below the horizon of the South China Sea, and the red light, from the red part of the spectrum was sort of reflecting off the upper level of the clouds. It was like a thin cloud layer, not really heavy clouds, but not really no clouds. That light cloud cover actually reflected those colors. But what I needed to do in order to get it to turn out the way that it did was to balance, the brightness of the sky with the darkness of the foreground. Even though there's some light in the foreground from the ocean reflecting off the sky, it's still much brighter in the background as in the sky part. So basically what I did is I took this filter, and this doesn't actually add any color. This is just gray, neutral density, which means just gray. So it's not adding any color. The color is all the natural color. It's just this filter allows the camera to see it in the same way that my eye and your eye would see it. So basically I just line up the gradation here right on the horizon, and then I'm able to shoot essentially what's a normal exposure, and then I get this great range of color. So that's been a great technique that I use pretty much on any sunset or sunrise. You can also use this filter to add a little drama to a rainy day, but mostly I just use this for sunsets.